Sorry, sir. We don't serve people like you. The words rang out across the bustling café, slicing through the clatter of cups and chatter. Richard, 71 years old, stood motionless. His well-worn Vietnam veteran cap sat proudly atop his silver hair. His jacket, adorned with patches that told stories few cared to ask about, hung straight over his back. His hands, once steady under enemy fire, now held nothing but air, and the weight of humiliation. Heads turned. Some customers paused, some whispered, some smirked. But just 20 minutes later, when 6 men in full military dress uniforms walked in and saluted him without a single word, the entire cafe fell silent. You could hear hearts pounding. You could feel shame crackling in the air. If this moment strikes a chord with you, comment respect. To remember those who never asked for applause, only acknowledgement. Richard Clark is a retired Army sergeant who served 2 tours in Vietnam. He buried his younger brother there, and ever since, he's lived a quiet life, alone, on a modest pension, each day shaped by routine. A morning walk, the sound of birds, folded flags on the shelf, and coffee at the corner cafe. That particular morning, he'd polished his boots, not for show, but because discipline never leaves you. His jacket, worn and sun-faded, still held the scent of long marches. His purple heart pin gleamed softly on his cap. As he opened the cafe door for a young mother and her toddler, he gave a small, respectful nod. The child stared up at him, pointing at the medals with wide eyes. But the mother tugged him along, as if the soldier was something to be feared, not admired. Inside, the cafe buzzed with routine. Students on laptops, professionals scrolling through phones. The rich aroma of coffee filled the air. Richard waited in line, quiet, patient, out of place. He noticed a couple in sleek athletic gear glance at him. The woman leaned over. Probably homeless. The man nodded without looking up. They're everywhere now. The words burned quietly, but Richard stood tall. When he reached the counter, the teenage cashier barely looked at him. She scanned him from boots to cap. Her expression turned cold. Sorry, sir. We don't serve people like you. The cafe went quiet. Richard blinked, confused. Like me? He asked gently. Drifters, loiterers, old guys looking for free stuff, she replied flatly. There's a shelter a few blocks down. Someone chuckled. A man at a table whispered, Maybe he thinks that hat earns him a discount. Richard's shoulders squared. He'd stood like that in jungles and firefights. I serve this country, he said quietly. I buried my brother under that flag. The manager arrived, young, polished, and irritated. Sir, please just leave, he said dismissively. This isn't a museum. You're making customers uncomfortable. Not a single person stood up for him. No one offered a seat. No one said, Thank you. He walked out, slow and silent. The bell above the door jingled behind him. Inside, conversation resumed. Lattes flowed, laughter returned. And just like that, he was invisible again. Richard sat on a cold bench outside facing the cafe. His hands trembled now, just slightly. Not from age, but from something deeper, something heavier than the rucksack he once carried. He hadn't cried since 1971, not even when they lowered his brother into the ground. But that day, something in him broke. In the puddle near his boots, he saw his reflection and wondered, when did my service become something shameful? When did a uniform turn into a reason to look away? A little boy peeked through the cafe window, curious. His mother pulled him back and closed the blinds. 2 teenagers walked by, backpacks slung low, confidence high. Bet he's just wearing that for attention, one said. My dad says most of those guys just buy that stuff at surplus stores. Richard looked down at the patch on his jacket. 173rd Airborne Brigade, the Sky Soldiers. Only 4 came home from his original platoon. 4. He reached into his jacket pocket and touched the medal he kept close. The one earned after an ambush that took 8 good men. He didn't carry it for glory. He carried it for them. But someone had noticed. A young man inside the cafe, barely older than Richard was when he first enlisted, had recorded everything. The post went live with trembling hands. They kicked out a vet for wearing his jacket. Middleton Cafe, 4th Street. This isn't right. The internet lit up. Veterans groups reposted it. Thousands commented. Within minutes, plans were being made. Where is this? I'm coming. Not on my watch. Tag your unit. Let's move. Richard didn't know any of this. He just sat there, alone, exhausted, wishing he'd gone straight home. But 20 minutes later, the street changed. A black car pulled up, then another and another. Out stepped men, older, younger, different walks of life, but each moved with purpose, with precision. 6 of them entered the cafe. Full dress uniforms, ribbons, medals, gravitas. The lead officer stepped to the counter, stared the cashier in the eye, and said, "We're with Sergeant Richard Clark, and we'll all be having coffee now." Silence. No one moved. Even the espresso machine seemed to pause. The manager stuttered, Is this some kind of prank?" A silver-haired colonel stepped forward. "No, sir. This is called loyalty, something you clearly don't understand." The cashier looked down, her voice suddenly meek. I didn't know he was a real vet. People dress up sometimes." "You didn't ask," said the youngest soldier, his face bearing a scar that told its own story. "You judged his jacket. Every ribbon on it was earned, and you mocked it." Outside, Richard stood slowly. He didn't know what was happening, until the cafe door opened, and a woman with captain's bars stepped out. "Sergeant Clark," she said, saluting. "Your table is waiting, sir." As he entered, the 6 soldiers formed a line. Each saluted as he passed, his back straightened, reflexively, muscle memory. Dignity returned. Customers stood, hats came off, phones lowered. Even the teenager who filmed the incident nodded silently, tears in his eyes. Richard tried to speak, but his voice cracked. I thought I was forgotten." The colonel stepped forward, placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "We forget nothing, Sergeant, and we leave no one behind. Not then, not now." One soldier paid for everyone's drinks. Another hung a framed plaque on the wall. "Reserved for Sergeant Richard Clark and all who served." The manager approached, humbled. "Sir, we made a mistake. Your coffee is on us. Always." Richard looked him in the eye. "It's not about free coffee." News crews arrived. The video went viral, millions of views overnight. The cafe's social media exploded. Public apology. Manager resigned. Mandatory training for staff announced. But Richard didn't ask for revenge. On a local news segment, he said only this: "Just promise me the next vet who walks in, whether their scars are visible or not, won't need a crowd behind them to be treated like a person." The CEO of the cafe chain flew in personally. With cameras rolling, he made a nationwide announcement. "Every location will now have a veterans table. Always reserved, always respected. It shouldn't take a viral video to remind us who built this country." A week later, the cafe unveiled the veterans table, a small American flag, a framed sign that read, "For those who served. Your coffee is waiting." Richard visits once a week now. Same seat, same coffee, but never alone. Other veterans join him from Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. Stories are shared, laughter returns. Even students come to listen. The young cashier now volunteers at the local Veterans Center, learning names, learning stories, learning respect. On the wall, next to the framed photo of Richard's unit, is a quote: "Service doesn't end when the uniform comes off. Neither should the respect." Veterans' tables began appearing across the country, not as charity, but as recognition. Richard never wanted applause. He never asked for fame. He just wanted peace. And finally, he found it. And now when he walks down the street in his patched jacket and weathered cap, people nod. Children ask questions, and he answers, keeping alive the stories of those who never came home. Subscribe to Ironheart Stories if you believe some uniforms deserve more than silence.